Imagine for a moment that someone in your life thinks they're better than you. Maybe they talk over you. Maybe they subtly undermine you. Maybe they smile at you, but every word carries a hidden judgment. Now, what if I told you that everything you've been taught about proving yourself, arguing back, or trying to earn respect is exactly what keeps you trapped in their game? Most people will never tell you this. Most motivational videos won't dare to go this deep. But by the time you finish watching this, you will see the truth they don't want you to know. I'm about to reveal 5 powerful ways to deal with people who think they're superior. Not by fighting them, not by yelling louder, not by proving them wrong, but by turning the game upside down in ways that will shock you. These are strategies so simple, yet so powerful, that once you start applying them, you'll wonder why no one ever taught you before. We're talking about silence that commands respect, strategies that redirect energy from resentment into unstoppable growth, and the kind of personal power that makes others realize your value without you having to say a word. By the end of this video, you will understand why explaining yourself too much is actually weakness, why competing in their ego game is a trap, why building your own skills silently is the ultimate form of revenge, and why walking away without announcing it is not cowardice, it's unmatched power. Every point I share is designed to change the way you interact, the way you think, and the way you live. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn isn't just advice, it's a blueprint to becoming untouchable in your confidence, unstoppable in your growth, and unbothered by anyone who tries to make you feel less than you are. Watch closely, absorb every word, and get ready to see the people who think they're better than you completely differently by the very end. When you stop explaining yourself, something very uncomfortable happens for the other person. They lose leverage. Most people don't realize this, but over-explaining is rarely about clarity. It's about seeking permission. It's a quiet signal that says, please understand me so I can feel safe. And people who think they are better than you are very good at sensing that signal. They don't consciously plan it, but instinctively they lean into it. They ask more questions. They poke holes. They interrupt. Not because they want to learn, but because every extra sentence you give them places you one step lower and them one step higher. Here's the hard truth. Confident people don't narrate their worth. They don't walk others through their decisions like a legal defense. They don't feel the urge to be understood by everyone in the room. They understand themselves, and that's enough. The moment you internalize that, your communication changes. Your words become fewer but heavier. You speak with intention, not anxiety. And that shift alone rewires how others perceive you. Psychologically, silence is unsettling to people who rely on dominance. When you don't rush to fill the gap, their mind fills it for you. They start wondering what you know that they don't. They start projecting meaning onto your calm. Silence forces them to confront themselves without the distraction of your explanations. That's why people with inflated egos often talk more than necessary. They can't sit with quiet. Quiet exposes insecurity. Think about it. When someone challenges you, interrupts you, or subtly talks down to you, your first instinct is to defend, to correct the record, to prove you're not who they assume you are. But in doing that, you accept their frame. You agree that they get to judge and you must respond. The real power move is stepping out of that frame entirely, not with arrogance, not with hostility, but with grounded restraint. This doesn't mean becoming passive or weak. It means being deliberate. You answer what needs to be answered and nothing more. You don't rush. You don't overqualify. You don't apologize for existing. You say what's true and you let it land. If they misunderstand you, you resist the urge to chase their understanding. Because understanding is not something you beg for. It's something others arrive at when they're ready. There's a philosophical idea that applies here. Dignity is preserved through limits. When you place limits on how much access others have to your inner world, you protect your sense of self. Over-explaining is often a boundary issue. It's giving too much access too quickly to people who haven't earned it. When you tighten that boundary, not out of fear but out of self-respect, people adjust. Some will respect you more. Others will feel threatened. That reaction tells you everything you need to know. In conversations with people who think they're better than you, watch what happens when you slow down. When you don't rush to respond, when you allow a pause to exist. That pause is not empty, it's full of meaning. It communicates composure. It communicates thoughtfulness. It communicates that you are not reactive. And in a world addicted to reaction, non-reactivity reads as strength. There's also a deeper layer to this. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop negotiating your identity. You stop handing pieces of yourself to others for approval. You begin to act from internal alignment rather than external validation. That's not just a communication skill. That's a psychological shift. You're no longer asking, do you accept me? You're asking, do I accept myself? And once that question is answered, the noise around you loses volume. People who believe they are superior often rely on subtle tactics. They correct you publicly. They question your choices. They offer unsolicited advice disguised as concern. If you meet that with lengthy explanations, you reinforce the dynamic. But if you respond briefly, calmly, and without emotional charge, you disrupt it. A simple, grounded response can carry more authority than a 5-minute defense, not because it's clever, but because it's congruent. And here's what's interesting, you don't even have to win the interaction. You just have to leave it intact. When you walk away without feeling smaller, without feeling the need to replay the conversation in your head, you've already succeeded. Over-explaining keeps you trapped in mental loops long after the conversation ends. Silence sets you free faster. This practice takes discipline. At first, it feels unnatural. You'll feel the urge to add one more sentence, to clarify one more point, to soften the edge so one feels uncomfortable. But growth often requires allowing discomfort, especially when that discomfort belongs to someone else. You're not responsible for managing their ego. You're responsible for managing your integrity. Over time, something shifts. People begin to approach you differently. They listen more closely. They interrupt less. Not because you demanded respect, but because your presence quietly requires it. You're no longer performing competence, you're embodying it, and embodiment is always more convincing than explanation. This doesn't mean never speaking up, it means speaking from a place of certainty rather than fear. When your words come from clarity, they don't need backup, they stand on their own. And when you don't explain yourself unnecessarily, you send a powerful message without saying it out loud. I trust myself enough not to convince you. So here's the reflection to leave with. The next time you feel the urge to over-explain, pause and ask yourself one question. Am I speaking to be understood, or am I speaking to be accepted? Because the moment you stop negotiating for acceptance is the moment your words begin to carry real weight. The moment you realize that not every game deserves your participation, your life gets quieter and stronger at the same time. People who think they are better than you almost always invite you into a competition you never agreed to. It may not look like a contest on the surface. It sounds like comparison, subtle flexing, unsolicited advice, or stories that just happen to highlight how far ahead they are. And if you step into that space and start measuring yourself against them, you've already accepted their rules. Psychologically, comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose clarity. The mind stops asking, what matters to me? And starts asking, where do I rank? That shift is dangerous. The moment your self-worth becomes relative, it becomes unstable. There will always be someone with more status, more money, more recognition, or more volume. People who rely on superiority know this. They don't need to be objectively better, they just need you to start keeping score. Refusing to compete where ego wants you to compete is not indifference, it is discernment. It's understanding that some arenas are designed to drain you, not develop you. When someone constantly brings the conversation back to achievements, appearances, or hierarchies, what they're really saying is, see me. And when you respond by counterproving, you turn their need into your obligation. That's a trade that never works in your favor. There is a philosophical idea worth sitting with here. Not all metrics are meaningful. Just because something can be measured doesn't mean it should be. Ego loves numbers, titles, and comparisons because they create the illusion of certainty. But a life built on comparison is always reactive. You're not moving toward a vision, you're moving away from someone else's shadow. When you refuse that game, something subtle but powerful happens. You reclaim your attention. Attention is the most valuable resource you have, and competition for ego purposes wastes it. Instead of asking how you stack up, you start asking better questions. Am I improving? Am I aligned? Am I acting with integrity? Those questions don't require an audience. They require honesty. People who expect you to come. Pete will often escalate when you don't. They'll brag louder. They'll probe for reactions. They'll try to pull you back in. This is where emotional discipline matters. You don't respond with dismissal or sarcasm. You respond with steadiness. You stay focused on your lane, not because you think you're above them, but because you know where you're going. And direction always matters more than position. There's also a deeper psychological layer at play. When someone defines themselves through superiority, they need contrast. They need someone to be beneath them for the story to work. When you stop competing, you remove yourself from that story. And that's unsettling. They can't place you. You're not chasing and you're not opposing, you're simply moving. That ambiguity often reads as confidence. It's important to understand that refusing to compete doesn't mean suppressing ambition. In fact, it clarifies it. Ambition driven by ego is fragile. It needs applause. Ambition driven by purpose is resilient. It survives silence. When you compete with yourself instead of others, progress becomes internal and sustainable. You're not fueled by proving people wrong. You're fueled by becoming more capable than yesterday. Think about the energy difference. Competing with ego requires constant comparison, constant vigilance, constant defense. Competing with yourself requires focus and patience. One exhausts you, the other builds you. And over time, people notice, not because you announce it, but because your work starts to speak in places where your voice never could. There's a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you don't need to win every room. Some rooms are designed to inflate egos, not cultivate growth. Walking into those rooms and staying grounded is a skill. Walking away mentally, even while physically present, is wisdom. You listen, you observe, you don't internalize the noise, you don't take the bait. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to prove your worth becomes harder to question. People sense when you're not seeking validation. They may not articulate it, but they feel it. Your presence becomes less reactive and more stable. You're no longer playing offense or defense, you're playing alignment. This approach also protects you from bitterness. When you don't compete in ego games, you don't lose them either. There's nothing to resent, no scoreboard to stare at, no imaginary judges, just your own standards. And standards, unlike comparisons, are within your control. Over time, the same people who once looked down on you may begin to look differently at you. Not because you outperformed them publicly, but because you didn't need to. And some will never change. That's fine. Your growth was never dependent on their recognition. So here's the reflection to carry forward. The next time you feel pulled into comparison, pause and ask yourself one simple question. Is this making me stronger or just louder? Because the most powerful move you can make is to invest your energy where it compounds, not where it competes. There's a moment most people don't talk about, but nearly everyone experiences. It's the moment when you realize resentment has quietly taken up space in your mind. Someone underestimated you, talked down to you, dismissed your ability, and even when they're not in the room, their presence lingers in your thoughts. You replay conversations, you imagine what you should have said, you feel the urge to prove them wrong. That's the moment where growth either begins or gets delayed. Resentment feels justified. It tells you a story that says, they were wrong, they were unfair, they didn't see my value. And sometimes that story is true, but here's the uncomfortable reality. Resentment is expensive. It consumes attention, emotional energy, and focus. And the worst part is this, resentment rarely hurts the person it's directed at. It drains the person carrying it. People who think they're better than you often benefit when you stay resentful, not because they planned it, but because resentment keeps you psychologically tethered to them. You're still in their orbit. Your energy is pointed outward instead of inward. And as long as that's true, your growth is slower than it could be. The alternative is not pretending the disrespect didn't happen. The alternative is deciding that your development matters more than your indignation. When you shift from resentment to skill building, something fundamental changes. You stop trying to win arguments that no longer matter and start investing in abilities that do. Skill building is one of the most underappreciated forms of self-respect. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require validation. When you build competence, you don't need to convince people of your worth. You demonstrate it through consistency, clarity, and results. And unlike resentment, skill compounds over time. There's a psychological principle here that's worth understanding. The brain can't fully focus on growth and grievance at the same time. One crowds the other. When your mind is occupied with resentment, it narrows, it looks backward. When your mind is focused on learning and mastery, it expands, it looks forward. That direction matters. People who stay resentful often believe they're holding on to motivation. They think anger is fuel. In the short term, maybe it is. But over time, anger corrodes judgment. It makes decisions reactive. Growth fueled by resentment tends to burn hot and fast, then collapse. Growth fueled by discipline and curiosity lasts. When you choose to build skills instead of resentment, you also reclaim agency. You're no longer waiting for someone to acknowledge your value. You're creating value regardless of who's watching. That's a subtle but powerful shift. It moves you from dependence to independence, from reaction to intention. Notice how this changes your internal dialogue. Instead of thinking, "I'll show them," you start thinking, "I'll improve this." Instead of obsessing over how you were perceived, you focus on what you can refine. That mindset doesn't just make you more capable, it makes you calmer. You're no longer emotionally hostage to someone else's opinion. There's also a philosophical depth to this. Resentment assumes the world owes you fairness. Skill building assumes responsibility regardless of fairness. One stance keeps you stuck in what should have been. The other moves you toward what could be. Life rarely corrects itself on your behalf, but it often responds to preparation. As your skills sharpen, something interesting happens. The same people who once dismissed you may not even recognize the version of you that emerges. Not because you changed who you are, but because you removed what was unnecessary. You stopped carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours to begin with. You became more precise, more focused, more grounded. This doesn't mean everyone will suddenly respect you. Some won't. And that's important to accept. Skill building isn't a guarantee of approval. It's a guarantee of self-trust. You know what you can do. You know what you've earned. And that knowledge stabilizes you in ways external praise never could. Another benefit of this approach is that it reduces the need for confrontation. When you're deeply invested in your own growth, you don't need to correct every slight or respond to every provocation. You're busy, your time has structure, your goals have gravity. Petty dynamics lose their appeal because they don't fit into the life you're building. And when resentment does arise, as it inevitably will, you learn to treat it as information, not instruction. You notice it. You acknowledge it. And then you redirect. You ask, what skill would make this irrelevant? That question is transformative. It shifts you from emotion to action, from reaction to creation. Over time, this practice rewires how you see yourself. You stop defining your identity through opposition. You're no longer the person who was overlooked or underestimated. You're the person who kept building anyway. That identity is quiet, but it's strong, and strength doesn't need witnesses to be real. So here's the reflection to sit with. Every ounce of energy you spend on resentment is energy not spent on becoming more capable. You don't need to prove people wrong to move forward. You just need to become so grounded in your own growth that their opinion no longer has a place to land. There comes a point where the most intelligent response is no response at all. Not because you don't have the words, and not because you lack courage, but because you finally recognize something deeper. Some dynamics are not meant to be fixed. Some relationships are not meant to be explained, and some people are not meant to come with you into the next version of your life. Walking away without announcing it is one of the hardest disciplines to master. Most people want closure. They want acknowledgement. They want the other person to finally understand what they did wrong. But here's the truth that's difficult to accept. People who think they are better than you rarely change through confrontation. In many cases, confrontation feeds the very identity they're attached to. It gives them significance. It tells them they mattered enough to provoke a reaction. Silence denies that reward. Psychologically, distance is a boundary, and boundaries are a form of self-respect. When you quietly remove yourself, you are not punishing the other person. You are protecting your attention, your time, and your emotional clarity, and those are assets. Once you understand their value, you stop spending them on situations that consistently diminish you. There's a subtle misconception about walking away. Many people confuse it with weakness or avoidance. In reality, it's discernment. Avoidance is driven by fear. Walking away is driven by clarity. It's the decision that says, I see this clearly now, and I no longer need to participate. That decision doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require justification. It stands on its own. People who rely on superiority often expect engagement. They expect you to react, to explain, to defend, to push back. When you don't, it disrupts the pattern. They may interpret your silence as confusion at first, then as indifference, and eventually as something they can't quite label. That ambiguity can be unsettling because it removes their sense of control. From a philosophical perspective, walking away quietly is an act of alignment. You're choosing coherence between your values and your actions. If you value dignity, growth, and peace, it makes no sense to remain in environments that consistently undermine those things. Staying too long in such spaces creates internal conflict. Leaving resolves it. What's important to understand is that you don't owe everyone access to your energy. Access is earned through mutual respect. When that respect isn't present, distance is not cruelty, it's clarity, and clarity simplifies your life in ways that explanation never could. There's also a deeper emotional shift that happens when you stop announcing your exits. You stop outsourcing your sense of closure. You realize that closure is not something someone else gives you through understanding or apology. Closure is something you grant yourself when you decide you're done. That realization is liberating. Many people stay entangled in draining relationships because they're waiting for a moment of recognition, a moment where the other person finally says, I see you now. But waiting for that moment hands your power over to someone else's readiness. Quietly walking away reclaims it. As you practice this, you'll notice how much energy you were spending managing impressions, smoothing tensions, and absorbing subtle disrespect. When that energy is freed, it doesn't disappear. It gets redirected into your work, into your relationships that are reciprocal, into your inner life. The quality of your focus improves because it's no longer fractured. It's also worth noting that walking away doesn't always mean physically leaving immediately. Sometimes it means emotional disengagement. You stop sharing as much. You stop seeking input. You stop investing in being understood by someone who has repeatedly shown you they are unwilling to listen. That quiet withdrawal is often the first and most important step. Over time, people who once had access to you may notice the distance. Some will try to pull you back in. Others will rationalize your absence in ways that protect their ego. None of that is your responsibility. Your responsibility is to live in a way that doesn't require you to shrink to be tolerated. There's a certain maturity that comes with realizing that not every ending needs an explanation. Some endings are simply a consequence of growth. You outgrow environments. You outgrow dynamics. You outgrow versions of yourself that once tolerated less than you deserved. That's not something to apologize for, and here's the quiet power in all of this. When you walk away without no ice, you teach yourself that you can survive without approval. You learn that your stability doesn't depend on how others see you. That lesson changes how you show up everywhere else. You become less reactive, more deliberate, more grounded. People often ask what the strongest response to disrespect is. It's not retaliation, it's not dominance, it's not proving someone wrong. The strongest response is removing yourself from the equation entirely and building a life that no longer requires their validation. So here's the reflection to leave you with. Pay attention to where your energy feels diminished rather than expanded. And when you recognize a pattern that asks you to be smaller, quieter, or less than who you are, remember this. You don't need to explain your worth to anyone. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply choosing peace and walking forward without looking back.